4,000 years. Wars, betrayals, miracles, massacres, entire empires rising and turning to dust. The Old Testament is not just a book. It is an encyclopedia of blood, faith, and survival that covers more time than any other record in human history. And the most disturbing part, all of it, from the first particle of light in the universe to the last prophet crying out in the desert, follows a single invisible thread. A plan. How is it possible that a text written by dozens of different authors in different centuries on different continents tells a story so absurdly coherent that it seems scripted from beginning to end? The answer lies in the next 60 minutes, and I guarantee you, even if you have heard these stories 1,000 times, there are things here you have never noticed. It all begins with nothing, not in the dark, in nothingness. No space, no time, no matter. The Hebrew text of Genesis 1 uses the expression tohu vabohu, void and formless. It is not just beautiful poetry. It is the most radical description anyone has ever attempted. Before everything, even the concept of before did not exist. And then, from the midst of this absolute void, a voice. Let there be light. No tools, no material, no process, just a spoken command, and the universe obeyed. In 6 days, according to the text, everything unfolds in a sequence that curiously mirrors what modern science describes: light first, then the separation of waters, dry land, vegetation, organized celestial bodies, marine life, and terrestrial life. Is it a coincidence? Perhaps. But it is a coincidence that has troubled many intelligent people throughout the centuries. And on the 6th day, God does something he did not do with any other creature. He stops. He consults with himself. Let us make man in our image. Notice the plural. Let us. Theologians have debated this for millennia, but the central point is clear. The human being was not spoken into existence like the rest. He was molded. Genesis 2:7 says that God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. It is intimate. It is personal. It is radically different from everything that came before. Adam wakes up in the Garden of Eden, and this place was not just a pretty park with flowers. The text describes real rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, which still exist today, cutting through modern-day Iraq. Gold, aromatic resin, and precious stones in the soil. Fruit trees of every kind, and at the center of it all, 2 trees that would change history forever: the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The rule was simple, a single prohibition in an entire world of freedom: do not eat the fruit of that tree. One single rule, and God did not hide the consequence. On the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. It is not ambiguous. It is not symbolic. It is a contract with an explicit clause. Eve was created from Adam's rib, not from his feet to be stepped on, nor from his head to rule over him, but from his side to walk beside him. Together, naked and unashamed, they managed a paradise that functioned without effort, without sweat, without pain, and without death. Try to imagine that, a world where nothing rots, nothing dies, and nothing hurts. That was the original plan. But here enters the detail that destroyed everything: a serpent. The text does not explain where it came from or why it could speak. It simply says it was more crafty than any other beast of the field. And its strategy was not to lie directly, it was to distort. Did God really say, "You shall not eat of any tree"? Notice, God said one tree. The serpent turned it into all. A subtle distortion that planted the first seed of doubt in human history. Eve ate, Adam ate, and the text says that immediately the eyes of both were opened. They did not gain wisdom, they gained shame. The first thing they did was sew fig leaves together to cover the nakedness that seconds before caused no embarrassment at all. Something inside them broke. And when they heard God walking in the garden, notice this detail: God walking, physically present, they hid. The punishment was surgical. For the serpent, to crawl in the dust forever. For Eve, pain in childbirth and conflict in her relationship with her husband. For Adam, the soil that once produced on its own would now require sweat, thorns, and labor until death. And death, that was the new reality. Death entered the world like a virus that never left. They were expelled from Eden. An angel with a flaming sword blocked the way back. End of Genesis chapter 3. Humanity has existed for only 2 generations and has already lost everything. And if you think the fall was the rock bottom, wait. Because what comes next is worse. Cain and Abel, the first 2 sons in history. Abel, a shepherd, Cain, a farmer, both offer sacrifices to God. Abel offers the best of his flock, the firstlings, the fat, the most valuable. Cain offers the fruits of the ground, but the text suggests he did not offer his best. God accepts Abel's offering and rejects Cain's, and here is born the first emotion that will haunt humanity for the rest of the Bible: envy. God still tries to warn him. Why are you angry? If you do well, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door and desires to have you. It is terrifyingly personal. God, face to face, telling Cain, "Be careful, something is waiting for you like a predator at the door." And Cain ignores it. He takes his brother to the field and kills him, the first homicide in history. And when God asks, "Where is Abel?" Cain responds with a phrase that echoes to this day: "Am I my brother's keeper?" Abel's blood cries out from the ground. Cain is cursed. The earth he cultivates will no longer yield its fruit. He becomes a wanderer. And from here, humanity descends into a spiral that seems to have no breaks. Generations multiply. Genesis 5 lists the genealogy from Adam to Noah, and the numbers are out of this world. Adam lived 930 years, Seth 912, Methuselah, the absolute record holder, 969 years. No one knows for sure if these numbers are literal, symbolic, or based on some lost calendar. But the text presents them with the naturalness of someone recording facts, not fables. And in the middle of this list, a mysterious figure appears, Enoch. Genesis 5:24 says simply, "Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. He did not die." In a chapter full of, "and he died, and he died, and he died," Enoch simply disappeared. He was taken. To where? The text does not say, but this solitary line has generated centuries of speculation. Meanwhile, humanity corrupts itself at an absurd speed. Genesis 6 opens with a passage that is one of the most enigmatic in the entire Bible. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and took for themselves all they chose. Who are these sons of God? Fallen angels, the lineage of Seth mixing with that of Cain, tyrant kings. Each interpretation opens a theological abyss. The result, however, is clear. The wickedness of man multiplied on the earth, and every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Not sometimes, not mostly, every thought all the time. And then comes the heaviest verse in Genesis, chapter 6, verse 6. "And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart." The creator of the universe looking at his creation and feeling pain. This is the moment where God decides to end it all. Not with cold anger, but with a heavy heart. And he announces a flood that will sweep all life from the face of the earth, all except for one family, Noah. Genesis 6:9 calls Noah righteous and blameless among his contemporaries. In a world where every thought was evil, one man resisted. And God gives him the most ambitious engineering project of antiquity, an ark 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high, 3 decks. Coated with pitch inside and out, no motor, no rudder, no sail. It was not a ship, it was a survival box designed to float, not to navigate. If you think that is impressive, think of Noah's neighbor. Imagine the man looking out his window and seeing someone building a giant ship in the middle of dry land. No rain in sight for decades. The Bible does not say how long it took, but tradition suggests somewhere between 55 and 120 years. Noah preached while he built. 2 Peter 2:5 calls him a herald of righteousness. No one listened. No one repented. If this makes you think about how many times in history people have ignored clear warnings of disaster, comment, nothing has changed. When the ark was ready, God sent the animals, 2 by 2, male and female, 7 pairs of clean animals. And after everyone had entered, Genesis 7:16 records a chilling detail, and the Lord shut him in. Noah did not close the door. God closed it. From the outside. Whoever was inside was safe. Whoever was outside, it was over. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, but it was not just rain. Genesis 7:11 says that all the fountains of the great deep burst forth. Water coming from under the earth, from the sky, from every side. The waters rose until they covered the highest mountains by more than 20 feet. The entire earth, an ocean. Everything that breathed on dry land died. Everything. Genesis is brutally direct about this. Every living thing that was on the face of the ground was blotted out. The ark floated for 150 days before the waters began to recede. 5 months in the dark, rocking, with hundreds of animals, 8 people, and no guarantee of when it would end. Noah released a raven, then a dove. On the second try, the dove returned with an olive branch. On the third, it did not return. The earth was drying. The first thing Noah did upon leaving the ark was build an altar and offer a sacrifice. And God made a promise he would never repeat. I will never again curse the ground because of man. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. And he sealed this promise with the first rainbow, a cosmic alliance, not with one people, not with one nation, but with the entire earth. But the new beginning did not last long. Noah planted a vineyard, drank the wine, became drunk, and lay naked in his tent. Ham, one of his sons, saw his father's nakedness and told his brothers. Shem and Japheth entered backward and covered their father. When Noah woke up, he cursed Canaan, Ham's son, and blessed Shem and Japheth. This curse would echo centuries later when the Israelites entered the land of Canaan. Nothing in the Old Testament is accidental. Every detail is a seed planted that will germinate hundreds of pages later. The post-flood generations spread out. Genesis 10, the Table of Nations, lists 70 peoples descended from Noah. It is the genetic map of the ancient world. From Shem came the Semites, including the Hebrews. From Ham came the Canaanites, Egyptians, and Philistines. From Japheth, the peoples of Asia Minor and Europe. Every conflict that will appear from now on, they are cousins fighting. And then humanity decides once again to challenge God. Let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Babel. In the plain of Shinar, modern-day Iraq, they began to stack baked bricks and bitumen. They had no stone, so they invented the brick. They had no mortar, so they used natural asphalt. Human ingenuity at the service of human arrogance. And what did God do? He did not send fire. He did not send a flood. He did something much more elegant and far more devastating. He confused their languages. From one day to the next, the bricklayer could not understand the engineer, and the engineer could not understand the laborer. The project stopped. People grouped themselves by language and scattered across the earth. Exactly what they did not want. Genesis 11:9 calls the place Babel, which sounds like the Hebrew word for confusion. Humanity's first global project ended in linguistic chaos. And here, after 11 chapters of creation, fall, flood, and dispersion, the Bible makes a radical zoom. From all of humanity to a single man, Abram, a man from Ur of the Chaldeans, a sophisticated city in southern Mesopotamia, probably polytheistic like everyone else around him, and God appears out of nowhere, without explanation, without context, and says, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you." No map, no defined destination, no guarantee, just go and trust. And Abram went. At 75 years old, he took Sarai, his barren wife, his nephew Lot, and started walking toward a place he did not know. This is the act of faith that foundations three world religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all trace their roots back to this moment. An elderly man, childless, answering a voice that no one else heard. The promise God made to Abram is the backbone of the entire rest of the Bible. Genesis 12:2-3. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Reread that last part. All the families of the earth. This is not a tribal promise. It is a global plan planted in a single family. Abram arrives in Canaan, and God confirms, "This is the land." But Canaan was not empty. It had Canaanites, Perizzites, Hittites, established peoples with cities, armies, and cultures. And Abram? He was a nomad with tents and flocks. The gap between the promise and reality was absurd. It is like someone promising you an entire continent while you are living in a camping tent. And as if that were not enough, Sarai was barren. The promise said great nation, but a great nation starts with at least one child, and Sarai's womb was closed. This tension between promise and impossibility would dominate the next 25 years of Abram's life. 25 years waiting for a child that did not come. Imagine the doubt. Imagine the nights looking at the sky asking, "Did I hear correctly?" In the midst of this time, everything happens. A famine pushes Abram to Egypt, where he lies that Sarai is his sister, out of fear of being killed because of her beauty. Pharaoh almost takes her as his wife. God intervenes with plagues. Abram leaves Egypt wealthier, but with a moral stain that will repeat as a pattern in the family for generations. Lot, the nephew, separates from Abram and chooses the Jordan plain, fertile, irrigated, similar to Egypt. He camps near Sodom. Abram stays with the arid mountains of Canaan. Who made the better deal? It seemed obvious at the time. But wait, 4 kings from the east invade the Dead Sea region, defeat 5 local kings, loot Sodom, and take Lot as a prisoner. When Abram receives the news, he does something no one expected from a nomadic shepherd. He arms 318 trained men, born in his own house, pursues the invading armies for over 100 miles, attacks at night, defeats the kings, and rescues Lot with all his goods. Genesis 14 reveals that Abram was not just a man of faith, he was a capable military commander. And on the return from this battle, one of the most mysterious encounters in the entire Bible occurs. Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He appears out of nowhere. No genealogy, no origin, no recorded end. He blesses Abram, Abram gives him 1/10 of everything, and then Melchizedek disappears from the text for 1,000 years, until he reappears in Psalm 110 and centuries later in the book of Hebrews. Who was he? The text does not explain, but his appearance is so charged with meaning that theologians have written entire libraries trying to decipher this single encounter. If the complexity and depth of these stories impress you, give a like now so this video can reach more people who have never heard it this way. Abram remains without a child. The weight corrodes. And Sarai, tired of waiting, makes a decision that will generate consequences until the 21st century. She offers Hagar, her Egyptian servant, so that Abram can have a child through her. It was a legal custom of the time, perfectly acceptable in ancient Mesopotamia. It was not a sin, but it was impatience. It was a human attempt to accelerate a divine promise. Ishmael is born. Abram is 86 years old, and for 13 years he assumes Ishmael is the child of promise. But when Abram is 99, God appears again and says, "No, the child of the covenant will be born of Sarah, from the 90-year-old barren woman." And he changes their names. Abram becomes Abraham, father of multitudes. Sarai becomes Sarah, princess, and he institutes circumcision as a sign of the covenant, a physical, permanent mark in the flesh of every man in the lineage. Sarah laughed when she heard the promise. She laughed, and God asked, "Is anything too hard for the Lord?" A year later, Isaac was born. The name means laughter. Every time Abraham called his son, he remembered that God turned the laughter of unbelief into the laughter of joy. But the most brutal test was yet to come. Genesis 22. God says, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering." Read that again. After 25 years of waiting, after a biological miracle, after everything, God asks for the son back. On the mountain of Moriah, the same location where, 1,000 years later, Solomon would build the temple. Coincidence? In the Old Testament, there is no such thing as coincidence. Abraham woke up early, cut the wood, saddled the donkey, and took Isaac. 3 days of walking, 3 days knowing what was going to happen. Isaac carried his own wood on his back and asked, "Father, we have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb?" And Abraham answered with the phrase that defines the faith of the entire Old Testament: God will provide for himself the lamb. At the last second, hand raised, knife ready, an angel shouted from heaven, "Do not lay your hand on the boy." A ram caught by its horns in a thicket appeared as a substitute. Abraham called that place "The Lord will provide." And God reaffirmed the covenant with an oath, the only time in the entire Bible where God swears by himself, because there was no one greater to swear by. This episode is the central axis of the Old Testament. A father offering his beloved son, a son carrying the wood of his own sacrifice up the hill, a substitute appearing at the last moment. If this reminds you of something, it is because it should. Sarah died at 127 years old in Hebron. Abraham bought the cave of Machpelah from the Hittites to bury her, the first legal property the family owned in the Promised Land. Not a palace, not a city, a tomb. The land of promise begins as a cemetery, and this land exists to this day. It is the most disputed site in Hebron, sacred to Jews and Muslims alike. Abraham sent his oldest servant back to Mesopotamia to find a wife for Isaac, because Canaan was a land of promise, but not of marriage. The servant found Rebekah by a well, exactly as he had asked God in prayer. Rebekah returned, married Isaac, and the lineage continued. But Rebekah was also barren, again. Infertility is almost a trademark of the matriarchs: Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel. Every child born in this family is a miracle snatched from impossibility. Isaac prayed for 20 years until Rebekah became pregnant with twins. And the twins were already fighting inside the womb. Esau was born first, red, hairy, a natural hunter. Jacob came right after, holding his brother's heel. The name Jacob literally means one who takes by the heel, or figuratively, deceiver. And he lived up to his name during the first half of his life. Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of lentils. He arrived from the field exhausted, saw Jacob cooking, and traded his eternal inheritance for hot food. Genesis says that thus Esau despised his birthright, a 30-second decision that altered the course of entire nations, because from Esau came the Edomites, and from Jacob, the 12 sons who would become the 12 tribes of Israel. But before becoming Israel, Jacob still had to go through the strangest night in the entire Bible. And what happened on that bank of the Jabbok River will redefine everything you think about how God deals with imperfect people. Jacob was alone. He had sent his family, servants and flocks, everything, to the other side of the Jabbok River. The next day, he was going to reunite with Esau, the brother who had sworn to kill him 20 years earlier, and in that darkness, someone grabbed him. Genesis 32 says simply, a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. No name, no explanation, just hand-to-hand combat that lasted the whole night. Jacob, the deceiver, the fugitive, the one who spent his whole life manipulating situations, was now locked in a fight he could not win by cleverness. And when the mysterious being saw that he did not prevail, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip. He dislocated the hip with a touch, a single touch, and even limping, Jacob did not let go. He said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The being asked, "What is your name?" And Jacob had to say his own name out loud. Jacob, deceiver. For the first time in his life, he did not pretend to be someone else. And the being said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and have prevailed." Israel. It means one who strives with God. The name of the entire nation, the name that will be on maps, treaties, and newspaper headlines for 3,000 years, was born from a struggle in the dark, from an imperfect man who refused to let go of God. Jacob limped for the rest of his life. The blessing came with a scar, and to this day, observant Jews do not eat the sciatic nerve of animals because of that night. Jacob reconciled with Esau in one of the most emotional reunions in Genesis. Hugs, tears, forgiveness. But the brothers went their separate ways. And now the story explodes in complexity because Jacob had 12 sons by 4 different women, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah. 12 sons, brutal rivalries, jealousy, favoritism, and at the center of it all, Joseph, the penultimate son. The first from Rachel, the woman Jacob truly loved. Joseph received a special tunic from his father, the famous coat, many colors, and his brothers hated him for it. But what really fueled the hatred were the dreams. Joseph dreamed that his brothers' sheaves of wheat bowed down to his. He dreamed that the sun, the moon, and 11 stars prostrated themselves before him. And he made the strategic mistake of telling these dreams out loud, at the dinner table, to the brothers who already wanted to kill him. At 17, Joseph was sent by his father to check on his brothers in the field. When they saw him from afar, they said, "Here comes the dreamer," and they planned to kill him. Reuben, the firstborn, convinced the others not to shed blood, throw him into a pit. He planned to rescue him later. But while Reuben was away, Judah had another idea. Sell Joseph to a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants passing by on their way to Egypt. They sold their own brother for 20 pieces of silver. Then they killed a goat, dipped the coat in the blood and took it to their father. "See if this is your son's coat." Jacob, the master of deception, was deceived by his own sons. He believed a wild animal had devoured Joseph. He tore his clothes and mourned for years. Meanwhile, Joseph was being sold as a slave in Egypt, in the house of Potiphar, captain of Pharaoh's guard. And here begins one of the most cinematic stories in the entire Bible. Joseph had every reason to be destroyed, sold by his brothers, torn from his family, a slave in a foreign country. But Genesis repeats a phrase like a refrain. The Lord was with Joseph. In Potiphar's house, Joseph prospered so much that the Egyptian put everything in his hands, until Potiphar's wife began to lust after him, day after day. And when Joseph refused, "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" she grabbed his garment. Joseph fled. He literally ran out, leaving the cloak in her hands, and she used that cloak as false evidence of an attempted rape. Joseph was imprisoned, from the master's house to the dungeon. Again, everything collapsed. Again, the text repeats, "The Lord was with Joseph." In prison, Joseph interpreted the dreams of 2 Pharaoh's officials, the cupbearer and the baker. He got both right. The baker was executed, The cupbearer was restored to his position. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him. The cupbearer forgot. For 2 whole years, Joseph rotted in prison because of a forgetful man. And then Pharaoh had a dream that no one could interpret. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 thin cows. 7 full ears of grain swallowed by 7 withered ears. Then the cupbearer finally remembered, oh, there is a Hebrew in prison who interprets dreams. Joseph was taken from the dungeon, shaved, dressed, and placed before the most powerful man in the world. And he did not hesitate. It is not in me. God will give the answer. 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. Egypt needed to stockpile now or die later. Pharaoh looked at Joseph and said, "Can we find a man such as this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" That day, Joseph went from prisoner to the second most powerful man in Egypt. He received the signet ring, fine linen clothes, a gold chain, and an Egyptian name. He was 30 years old, 13 years of suffering, from the pit to the palace. 30 years in which every door that closed was actually leading him to that exact moment. The famine arrived, not only in Egypt but in all the earth. And back in Canaan, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another? Go down to Egypt and buy grain for us, that we may live and not die." 10 brothers went down. Benjamin, the youngest, the other son of Rachel, stayed behind. And when they arrived before the governor of Egypt, they prostrated themselves with their faces to the ground, exactly as Joseph's dream had shown 20 years before. Joseph recognized his brothers immediately. They did not recognize him. And what Joseph did in the following chapters is a masterpiece of psychological tension. He accused them of spying. He imprisoned Simeon as a hostage. He demanded they bring Benjamin. He hid a silver cup in Benjamin's sack to test if the brothers would abandon him as they had done to him. And when Judah, the same one who suggested the sale, offered himself as a slave in Benjamin's place, Joseph could not take it anymore. He ordered all the Egyptians out of the room, and he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it from the outside. "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" The brothers were terrified, but Joseph said something that is the theological key to the entire book of Genesis. "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive." This phrase is the summary of the whole of Genesis. Human evil exists. It is real, it is brutal, it has consequences. But God operates within the chaos, not by eliminating suffering, but by redirecting it toward a purpose that no one could see at the time. Jacob went down to Egypt with his entire family, 70 people. Genesis 46 lists every name. 70 souls entering a foreign country. When they leave, 400 years later, they will be more than 2 million. Jacob met Joseph in Egypt and said, "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." The old patriarch blessed his sons before dying, and each blessing was a prophecy. Judah's is the most weighted. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. Tribute comes to him. Who? The text does not say, but this promise stays suspended in the air like a shot arrow that will not land for over 1,000 years. Joseph died at 110 years old in Egypt. His last words were a command, "God will surely visit you. When he does, carry up my bones from here." He knew the story did not end in Egypt. Egypt was a parenthesis, and so Genesis ends with a coffin in Egypt and a promise of liberation. Exodus opens with a phrase that changes everything. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. A generation forgot. The people who saved Egypt from famine were now seen as a threat. The Hebrews had multiplied so much that Pharaoh panicked. First, slavery. Forced labor in Pithom and Ramses, storage cities built with mud bricks and straw under the scorching sun of the Nile Delta. Then, when slavery did not slow the growth, infanticide. Pharaoh ordered every male Hebrew child to be thrown into the Nile River. Every boy, every newborn, It was systematic genocide. And in this scenario of absolute horror, a woman from the tribe of Levi hid her baby for 3 months. When she could no longer hide him, she made a basket of reeds, a miniature of Noah's Ark, the same Hebrew word tiva is used for both, and placed the baby in the Nile. The sister stayed watching from afar. Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe in the river. She found the basket. She opened it. The baby cried. And the Egyptian princess, daughter of the man who decreed the death of every Hebrew boy, looked at that baby and felt compassion. The sister appeared. "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women?" And so Moses' own mother was paid by Pharaoh's palace to nurse her own son. The irony is so precise it seems like fiction. But the Old Testament operates this way. Every human plan of destruction is turned inside out by a providence that no one calculated. Moses grew up in the palace, educated as an Egyptian prince, languages, administration, military strategy, Egyptian theology. Acts 7:22 says he was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and deeds. But he knew who he was. At 40, he went out to see the suffering of his people. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. He looked one way, he looked the other, and he killed the Egyptian. He buried the body in the sand. The next day, he tried to separate 2 Hebrews who were fighting, and one of them said, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses fled from Pharaoh's palace to the desert of Midian, from prince to shepherd, and there he stayed for 40 years. 40 years in silence. 40 years taking care of sheep in the middle of nowhere. If at 40 he thought he was ready to liberate his people, God thought he needed 40 more years of preparation. Moses learned every trail, every water source, every route of that desert, the same desert through which he would later lead 2 million people. And then at 80 years old, a bush caught fire and was not consumed. Moses approached to see, and from the midst of the fire, a voice. "Moses, Moses, take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." God introduced himself. "I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And he declared, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt and have heard their cry. I know their sufferings. I have come down to deliver them." 400 years of silence. Entire generations were born and died in slavery without hearing a single voice from heaven. And now God was saying, "I saw, I heard, I came down." Silence was not absence. It was waiting. Moses received the mission. "Come, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people out of Egypt." And Moses, the man who once killed an Egyptian on impulse, was now full of excuses. "Who am I? They will not believe me. I am not eloquent." Every objection God answered, until Moses said, "Oh my Lord, please send someone else." And the anger of the Lord was kindled, but even in anger he did not give up on Moses. He gave Aaron as a spokesperson and sent both back to Egypt. Moses arrived before Pharaoh with a simple message. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go." Pharaoh responded, "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go." He was going to know. 10 plagues, each more devastating than the last, each attacking a specific god of the Egyptian pantheon. Water into blood against Hapi, the god of the Nile. Frogs against Heket, the frog-headed goddess of fertility. Gnats, flies, livestock plague, boils, hail with fire, locusts that covered the sun. 3 days of total darkness against Ra, the sun god. Pharaoh hardened his heart 9 times, and then came the 10th, the worst. Midnight, the angel of death passed through Egypt. Every firstborn died, from the son of Pharaoh to the son of the prisoner in the dungeon. Everyone. But the Hebrews who had painted lamb's blood on the doorposts were protected. The angel saw the blood and passed over. Pesach, Passover, to pass over, liberation cost blood. A lamb died so the firstborn could live. That same night Pharaoh called Moses and said, "Get up, go, take everything." And 600,000 men, not counting women and children, left Egypt after 430 years, and they took with them the bones of Joseph as he had asked. The promise of a man on his deathbed, fulfilled 400 years later. But Pharaoh repented. He gathered 600 elite chariots and pursued the Hebrews to the Red Sea. In front, water; behind, the most powerful army in the world. The Hebrews panicked. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And Moses said, "Fear not, stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord." God commanded Moses to stretch out his staff over the sea. An east wind blew all night. The waters were divided. 2 liquid walls, a dry corridor in the middle. The Hebrews crossed. When the Egyptians went in after them, the chariot wheels clogged. And at dawn, the waters returned. Not one survived. Exodus 14:30 records, "Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore, and there, on that bank, the people sang." Exodus 15, the Song of Moses, is considered one of the oldest poems in the Bible. Miriam took a tambourine and danced. Slaves yesterday, free today. But freedom is harder than anyone imagined, because it is easy to take Israel out of Egypt. The hard part is taking Egypt out of Israel. 3 days after crossing the sea, the people were already complaining about water. Weeks later, complaining about food. "Oh, that we had died in Egypt when we sat by the meat pots." They preferred slavery with comfort to freedom with discomfort. And God, with a patience that borders on the incomprehensible, sent manna from heaven, mysterious bread that appeared every morning on the desert floor, white with the taste of honey wafers. Each person could gather only enough for one day. Whoever kept it for the next day found it rotten, except on Friday. They gathered double because on Saturday there would be none, for 40 years, every day, without failing once. 3 months after Egypt, the people arrived at Sinai. And what happened there changed human civilization forever. God descended upon the mountain in fire, smoke, thunder, and earthquakes. The entire mountain trembled. The people were forbidden to touch the mountain on pain of death. And God spoke. The 10 Commandments, not as suggestions, not as advice, as absolute law, engraved by the very finger of God on 2 stone tablets. "You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make images. You shall not take the name of the Lord in vain. Remember the Sabbath. Honor father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet." 10 phrases that became the moral foundation of the West. Every modern legal code, from Rome to contemporary criminal law, has roots in those tablets. But along with the 10 Commandments came more than 600 laws. Laws on food, hygiene, social justice, property, slavery, marriage, agriculture, diseases, and civil construction. The entire book of Leviticus is a manual on how a holy people should live in the midst of a contaminated world. And at the center of it all, the tabernacle. A portable tent designed with specifications so detailed that Exodus devotes 13 chapters to its construction. Gold, silver, bronze, linen, ram's skins dyed red, acacia wood, every piece with meaning. The Holy of Holies, the innermost compartment, contained the Ark of the Covenant, with the tablets of the law inside. And over the Ark, between 2 golden cherubim, was the mercy seat, the place where the high priest sprinkled blood once a year on the Day of Atonement. It was there that God dwelt among the people, the presence of the Creator of the universe, in a tent in the middle of the desert. Moses stayed 40 days on the mountain receiving instructions, and the people down below could not stand the weight. They went to Aaron, the high priest, and said, Make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. 40 days, only 40 days after hearing the voice of God thundering from the mountain, after seeing the fire and the smoke, after promising all that the Lord has spoken, we will do, the people manufactured a golden calf. Aaron melted the gold earrings, fashioned the image, and said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." The high priest, the spokesperson of God, leading idolatry. When Moses came down and saw the party, he threw the tablets of the law on the ground. They broke at the foot of the mountain. The covenant lasted less time than the stone tablets it was written on. 3,000 people died that day, and Moses went back to the mountain and said to God, "But now if you will forgive their sin, but if not, please blot me out of your book." He offered himself as a substitute, and God remade the tablets. Again, a second chance. This is the pattern of the entire Old Testament: sin, consequence, mercy, new beginning, repeated hundreds of times. If this story is marking you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any detail. Numbers 13. Moses sent 12 spies to examine Canaan, the promised land, 40 days exploring. They returned carrying a cluster of grapes so large it took 2 men to carry it on a pole. The land was everything God had promised, milk and honey. But 10 of the 12 spies said, "We cannot. The inhabitants are giants. We seem like grasshoppers in our own sight." 2 disagreed, Joshua and Caleb. "If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land." But the people listened to the 10, not the 2, and they wept all night. "Oh, that we had died in Egypt. Let us choose a leader and go back to slavery, out of fear." And God said, "You want the desert? You shall have the desert. 40 years, 1 year for each day of spying. That entire generation over 20 years old would die without stepping into the promised land, except 2. Joshua and Caleb, the only ones who believed. 40 years, an entire generation consumed in the desert, funerals after funerals, day after day, month after month, burying fathers, mothers, uncles, grandparents, all those who left Egypt, falling one by one in the sand. And in the midst of those 40 years, even Moses failed. At Meribah, the people complained of thirst. Again. God told Moses to speak to the rock. Instead of speaking, Moses, frustrated, exhausted, probably furious, struck the rock with his staff. Twice, water gushed out, the people drank. But God said, "Because you did not believe in me, to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them." Moses would not enter Canaan. The man who faced Pharaoh, divided the sea, climbed Sinai, and carried that people on his back for decades, barred at the door, for a strike of a staff. Does it seem disproportionate? Perhaps. But the text is saying something about leadership. The greater the responsibility, the smaller the margin for error. He who represents God before millions does not have the luxury of impulsivity. Deuteronomy 34. Moses climbed Mount Nebo. From the top, God showed him all the land, Gilead as far as Dan, Naphtali, Ephraim, Manasseh, Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain of the valley of Jericho. Everything. God said, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there." And Moses died there at 120 years old. Perfect vision, strength intact. God himself buried him, and no one to this day knows where his grave is. The text closes with a verbal headstone. "And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face." Joshua took command, and God said to him what he says to every terrified leader: "Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." The Jordan was in flood stage, impossible to cross. God commanded the priests to enter the river carrying the Ark of the Covenant. The instant their feet touched the water, the river stopped. 2 million people crossed on dry ground. Again, just like at the Red Sea. And the first city in the way was Jericho, stone walls, locked gates, the most fortified fortress in Canaan. God's military strategy: march around it 7 days, in silence, without attacking, no arrows, no battering rams, just march. On the 7th day, 7 laps. The priests blew the trumpets, the people shouted, and the walls collapsed. Archaeologists who excavated Tel es-Sultan found evidence of walls that collapsed outward, not inward, as would be normal in an attack. They fell outward, creating a ramp of bricks that the attackers could climb. Jericho fell without a single sword strike on the wall. The conquest of Canaan took about 7 years, 31 kings defeated. Joshua divided the land among the 12 tribes. Each received its territory. And Joshua's last words to the people were a choice. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. The people chose the Lord that day. But the next generation forgot, and the generation after that forgot even more. The book of Judges records the most tragic and repetitive cycle in human history. The people sin. God allows enemies to oppress them. The people cry out. God raises up a judge, a temporary military leader who delivers them. Peace for a generation. Then the people sin again, and the cycle restarts. 12 judges over approximately 300 years. Deborah, the only woman among them, led Israel in a victory against 900 iron chariots commanded by Sisera, who ended up killed by a woman named Jael, who drove a tent peg into his temple while he slept. Gideon defeated 135,000 Midianites with 300 men armed with torches inside clay jars and trumpets. Samson killed 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. But he could not resist a woman named Delilah, the strongest man in the world, destroyed not by an army, but by his own weakness. Judges ends with a phrase that is an epitaph. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Total moral anarchy. The people demanded a king. Samuel, the last judge and first great prophet, warned, "A king will take your sons for war, your daughters for the kitchen, your lands for himself, and 10% of everything you have. In that day you will cry out because of your king, but the Lord will not answer you." The people did not listen. "No, we want a king like all the nations." God gave them Saul, tall, handsome, impressive, a head taller than any other Israelite. The king the people wanted, and Saul started well. But power corroded him. He disobeyed direct orders. He offered sacrifices that were not his to offer. He spared what he should have destroyed. And when Samuel confronted him, Saul gave excuses instead of repentance. The sentence, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you." While Saul still occupied the throne, God sent Samuel to Bethlehem, an insignificant little town, to anoint the next king. In Jesse's house, 7 sons passed before Samuel. None were chosen. There remains yet the youngest. He's keeping the sheep. They brought a ruddy teenager, and God said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he." David, shepherd, poet, warrior, king. The man after God's own heart. With a stone and a sling, he killed Goliath, a giant nearly 9 feet tall, covered in bronze, who had challenged Israel's army for 40 days. No one dared. And a boy without armor went down to the valley and shouted, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. 1 stone, 1 sling." Goliath fell face down on the ground, but David's ascent was slow and bloody. Saul tried to kill him out of jealousy. David fled. He lived in caves, led a band of outcasts, and twice had the chance to kill Saul and refused. I will not put out my hand against the Lord's anointed. When Saul finally died in battle, David did not celebrate. He wept, and he composed a lament that is a literary masterpiece. David reigned first over Judah, then over all Israel. He conquered Jerusalem from the Jebusites and transformed it into the capital, the city of David. He brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, dancing before it with such intensity that his own wife despised him for it. And God made David a promise that echoes through the rest of the entire Bible. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. Forever. An eternal throne. This is the most weighted promise in the Old Testament after Genesis 3. But David fell. From the roof of the palace, he saw Bathsheba bathing. He desired her, he sent for her, he lay with her. She became pregnant. And to cover the adultery, David sent her husband, Uriah, one of his most loyal soldiers, to the front line of the deadliest battle. Uriah died. David married Bathsheba, and for months, silence. Until the prophet Nathan arrived and told a parable about a rich man who stole a poor man's only sheep. David exploded, "The man who has done this deserves to die." Nathan pointed his finger, "You are the man." And the sword never departed from David's house. The child died. Another son, Amnon, raped his own sister. Absalom killed Amnon and then tried to take his father's throne. David fled Jerusalem barefoot, weeping. The man after God's own heart, not because he was perfect, but because when confronted with his sin, he did not give excuses like Saul. He said only, "I have sinned against the Lord." If the difference between Saul and David tells you something about how people deal with their own mistakes, comment, "No excuses." Solomon, son of David and Bathsheba, inherited the throne. When God appeared in a dream and said, "Ask what I shall give you," Solomon asked for wisdom, and he received everything: wisdom, wealth, power. He built the temple of Jerusalem in 7 years. Cedar from Lebanon, carved stones, gold everywhere. The inner walls, the altar, the cherubim, even the floor was overlaid with gold. When the Ark of the Covenant was placed in the Holy of Holies, the glory of God filled the temple in the form of a cloud so dense that the priests could not stand. The portable tent of the desert was now a permanent temple. But Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, made the most predictable mistake in history. 700 wives, 300 concubines, foreign women who brought their gods. And Solomon, in his old age, his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. The wisest became the most foolish, and God said, "The kingdom will be torn away." After Solomon, the kingdom split in two: 10 tribes to the north, Israel; 2 to the south, Judah, and both kingdoms entered a downward spiral. The north had 19 kings in 200 years. Not one was good, not one. Jeroboam manufactured golden calves. Ahab and Jezebel introduced the cult of Baal with ritual prostitution and child sacrifice. Against this darkness, God raised up prophets. Elijah challenged 450 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. How long will you go limping between 2 different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. Fire fell from heaven, consumed the sacrifice, the stones, the water, and the dust around it. 450 prophets of Baal were executed. In the south, Judah wavered. Good kings like Hezekiah and Josiah interspersed with kings who burned their own children in sacrifice to Moloch in the valley of Hinnom. And the prophets shouted, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, Hosea, Micah, each with the same message: come back, repent, justice is coming. But they also planted seeds of hope that no one fully understood. Isaiah wrote about a suffering servant who would be wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities, 700 years before anyone knew who he was talking about. Jeremiah promised a new covenant, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers, written not on stone, but on the heart. In 722 BC, Assyria invaded the northern kingdom. Israel was swept off the map. 10 tribes were scattered, deported, and mixed with other peoples. They disappeared from history. 136 years later, in 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon did the unthinkable. He destroyed Jerusalem. He burned Solomon's temple to the foundations. He melted the bronze pillars. He took the people into exile. Psalm 137 captures the pain of that moment. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept, when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Everything was lost, temple, ashes, throne of David empty, promised land taken. The covenant seemed dead, 70 years of exile. But in Babylon, Daniel was thrown into the lion's den and came out without a scratch. His 3 friends were thrown into a furnace heated 7 times more than normal and walked in the midst of the fire with a 4th figure beside them. And Daniel prophesied kingdoms that would rise and fall, Persia, Greece, Rome, with a precision that historians still debate today. And then, in 539 BC, Cyrus, king of Persia, conquered Babylon and issued a decree. The Jews could return. Ezra led the reconstruction of the temple. Nehemiah rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem in 52 days, with the workers holding a sword in one hand and a tool in the other. The people returned. The temple was rebuilt, smaller, simpler, without the Ark of the Covenant, which disappeared from history and was never found again. When the elders who had seen the first temple saw the second, they wept, not with joy, with longing. But the prophet Haggai said, "The latter glory of this house shall be greater than the former," and the Old Testament ends this way, in suspension. Malachi, the last prophet, wrote around 430 BC, and then silence. 400 years without a single prophetic voice, 400 years of waiting. The throne of David remained empty. The suffering servant of Isaiah had not appeared. The new covenant of Jeremiah had not been inaugurated. He to whom the scepter of Judah belonged had not arrived. All the promises, the seed of the woman who would crush the serpent, the blessing of Abraham for all nations, the eternal throne of David, the servant who would carry the sins of the people, all suspended, like arrows shot that have not yet landed. And the Old Testament closes like a book that stopped in the middle of a sentence. It is not a period, it is a comma. Every page, every war, every prophecy, every lamb sacrifice, every failed king, every repeated promise points forward to something that has not yet happened. And if you have listened to everything up to here, you understand one thing that most people don't. The Old Testament is not a collection of disconnected stories. It is a single narrative, the single arc, from creation to chaos, from chaos to promise, from promise to waiting. And the waiting is not the end. It is the intermission before the next act. Click on the next video appearing on your screen. If you made it this far, I guarantee it was made for you.